My name is Patricia Mercer. I am 68 years old, a retired bookkeeper who spent 40 years balancing other people's ledgers before realizing life itself has its own accounting system, one that measures not in dollars, but in dignity. I live alone in the cedar-framed house my late husband Edward and I built just outside Salem, Oregon. Every wall still carries his touch. The shelves he carved the faint scent of varnish that never quite faded the porch light he swore would always lead you home. For 12 years, I've lived quietly. I read in the mornings, tend to my rose garden in the afternoons, and drink chamomile tea at night while the news hums softly in the background. My house was peaceful, not silent but calm, the kind of calm that comes only after years of noise. That calm ended on a Thursday morning. My son announced, "My wife, our kids, and my mother-in-law will live here. It's crowded, but we'll manage." I smiled and started saving every receipt. It began with the sound of a moving truck pulling into my driveway. The rumble shook the gravel loose, and a small cloud of dust rose curling against the kitchen window like smoke from an old wound. I stepped onto the porch, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. There they were, my son Ethan, his wife Melissa, her mother Carol, and their 3 children, Lily 9, Ben 6, and Toby 3. They spilled out of 2 cars and a rented truck like a tide that had no intention of retreating. Ethan looked tired but proud. Chest lifted, voice confident. "Mom," he said, "this is just for a while. Melissa's mother needs a place to stay while she recovers from surgery, and the kids need more space. It's a bit crowded, but we'll manage. We'll manage." I stood there, teacup warm in my hand, feeling the weight of those words settle into the air like dust on sunlight. I wanted to ask, when did we decide this? But instead, I smiled. The kind of smile women my age have perfected, polite practiced, and painfully quiet. "That's nice," I said softly. Melissa was already walking toward the door with boxes stacked in her arms. "We'll just get settled in," she said, not waiting for an answer. Carol followed close behind, carrying a potted plant that looked like it had never seen real soil. "I'll put this by the window," she murmured, brushing past me. The children ran inside, squealing as if the house had been built just for their joy. Ethan turned to me with a sheepish grin. "It'll be fine, Mom. You'll see. Family together again. Family," I repeated. But my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. By noon, my house no longer belonged to silence. Boxes filled the hallway. A plastic toy car blocked the stairs. Someone had turned on the television, and the sound of cartoon laughter replaced the quiet tick of the kitchen clock. I stood at the threshold watching Melissa rearrange the furniture I'd chosen with Edward 30 years ago. She moved the couch away from the window, better light for the kids' play area, and replaced my lace curtains with bright floral ones she'd brought from their old place. Her mother Carol took over the dining table, spreading out knitting supplies as if it were her private studio. "It's so cozy," she said, though a little small. I smiled again. Yes, a little. That evening I cooked dinner for 7 instead of 1. The noise was endless forks, clinking children shouting, Melissa giving instructions. I passed the mashed potatoes down the line and tried to focus on the familiar rhythm of serving. Carol spoke between bites. "You must be relieved to have company again. Living alone at your age can't be easy." "I manage," I said. Ethan laughed lightly. "Mom, you've always been independent. But this will be good for you, less lonely, you know." I nodded even as Melissa leaned toward him and whispered, "Can you hand me the salt, dear? It's on our counter." There it was. 2 simple words, our counter. I froze for half a second, but only inside. My face stayed calm, my hands steady. After dinner, while they cleared plates, I walked to my small office and opened my desk drawer. Inside was a blank notebook, the kind I used to track business accounts decades ago. On the first page, I wrote the date. Then beneath it, a single line, Melissa referred to the kitchen as our counter. It was not anger that guided my pen. It was instinct. The old rhythm of record keeping, the habit of keeping truth in ink when words fail. Days passed, and the rhythm of my life was rewritten. Carol began hosting her book club in my living room. Melissa replaced my ceramic dishes with matching white plates. The children's shoes lined the hallway like a parade of invasion. Every evening, I tidied after them in silence. I stacked boxes they hadn't unpacked, folded blankets they had left on the floor, and listened to the hum of their world bleeding into mine. Each night, I added new entries to the notebook. Utilities bill increased by 42 years. Melissa moved my photo of Edward to make space for a family portrait. Carol criticized the curtains again. No bitterness, no accusation, just documentation. It wasn't revenge I was collecting. It was clarity. A week later, Ethan knocked on my door. Mom, we're thinking of redoing the kitchen a bit. Maybe an island, maybe brighter tiles. It'll feel more like our home. There it was again. Our home. I looked up at him. His face so confident, so certain that his words carried kindness. That's generous of you, I said evenly. Make sure to keep the receipts. He smiled, not realizing the meaning beneath my words. Of course, Mom. Melissa keeps everything organized. I smiled too. So do I. When he left, I wrote the sentence down in my book. Then for the first time, I underlined it. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, sipping tea from Edward's old mug, the one Melissa had nearly donated. The walls felt closer, the air thicker. I could hear laughter from the living room, but it sounded like another world. I opened my notebook again and added one more entry. If silence has a price, let the receipts show its value. Then I turned off the lights except for one. The porch light Edward had installed decades ago. It glowed against the dark window like a promise kept. And I whispered into the quiet, "This is still my house. For now." Somewhere in the distance, the moving truck's echo still lingered. But the house, for the first time since morning, exhaled, because I had started to count, and numbers, unlike people, never lie. The morning after they moved in my house no longer felt like mine. I woke up to the smell of coffee I didn't brew and the sound of cupboards opening and closing in a rhythm I didn't recognize. The air was different, busier, heavier. When I stepped into the kitchen, I stopped at the doorway. Melissa was standing at the counter, her hair tied up, giving instructions, as if she'd lived here her whole life. Carol sat at the table reading a newspaper like a queen waiting for her breakfast. Ethan was feeding the youngest, and the two older children were fighting over cereal. "Good morning," I said. Melissa turned cheerful but distracted. "Oh, morning, Patricia. I hope you don't mind, we did a little rearranging. Mom thought it'd be easier if the plates were closer to the sink." I glanced toward the cabinets. The dishes Edward and I had bought decades ago, the ones we used every Sunday morning, were no longer stacked neatly by the window. They had been moved, replaced by plastic bowls and color-coded cups. Carol looked up from her paper and smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "At your age," she said, "it's nice to have company. I always tell Melissa loneliness can be dangerous for older people." I nodded slowly, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. "I appreciate the company," I said. My voice sounded calm, but inside something small shifted like a drawer closing too tightly. By lunchtime, the kitchen looked nothing like it had before. The toaster had been replaced. The fridge was covered in magnets from places I'd never been. Even the calendar I used to mark bills and birthdays was gone. Melissa had hung a digital planner instead. Ethan came home from work early, tie-loosened face, flushed with good intentions. "Mom, isn't it nice everything's more efficient now?" I smiled. "Yes, it's very efficient." When he left the room, I pulled open the drawers quietly. Every familiar thing had been replaced with something newer, shinier, soulless. Later that evening, I wrote in my small notebook, "Plates moved," "Calendar replaced," "Kitchen efficiency achieved." I drew a tiny check mark beside the last line. It was my way of staying sane, writing instead of reacting. 3 days later, I came home from the grocery store to find strangers in my bedroom. Melissa's mother, Carol, was standing at my dresser holding one of Edward's photographs. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," she said. "Melissa thought it'd be better to swap rooms. You'll get the smaller one, it's closer to the laundry. More privacy for you." I froze. Swap rooms. Melissa appeared behind her, smiling. "It's just temporary, Patricia. The kids need the extra space upstairs, and Mom has that back issue so she can't handle the stairs." I looked past them, my bed half-stripped, the quilts folded and stacked by the door. The walls looked bare without my paintings. "Of course," I said quietly, "if it helps." "See," Melissa beamed. "I told you she'd understand. You're so accommodating." That word stayed with me, accommodating. It's what people say when they take something that isn't theirs. That night, I lay in the small spare room near the laundry. The hum of the washing machine filled the silence, steady and mechanical. I missed the sound of the wind through the upstairs window, the one Edward used to open just a crack so the air would smell like cedar and rain. I reached for my notebook on the nightstand and wrote "Room exchanged, privacy achieved, age appropriate." Then underneath, Carol says, "Loneliness is dangerous. She should meet silence." Days turned into weeks. Every morning I'd wake to new changes I hadn't agreed to. My favorite chair was moved to the garage to make room for the playpen. My rose-patterned tablecloth was replaced with plastic for easier cleanup. Even the family photos on the mantel were rearranged so that Edward and I stood at the edges while Ethan's family filled the center. Each time something disappeared, I wrote it down. Not out of anger, just out of record-keeping. Old habits die quietly. One Saturday morning, Melissa stood in the kitchen holding my old ceramic teapot. It was white with faint blue flowers, the kind Edward had bought for our 10th anniversary. I still remembered his words, "Something that lasts as long as we do." Melissa turned to me, smiling. "I hope you don't mind, Patricia. This teapot takes forever to boil and the handle's chipped. I ordered an electric one. It's faster and safer." She placed the teapot on the counter almost gently, as if mercy excused theft. "Of course," I said. "Whatever's easier." That afternoon, I couldn't find it. I checked every cabinet, every shelf. Then near the door, beside a box labeled "Donation," I saw it wrapped in newspaper ready to be given away. My hands trembled as I unwrapped it. The porcelain was cool and familiar, like the surface of an old memory. I ran my thumb across the chipped handle and thought of Edward's laugh, the way he used to tap it twice before pouring tea. I placed it back in the cupboard behind the new electric kettle. That night, I wrote "Teapot replaced by electric model. Time saved, sentiment lost." Then in smaller letters, "Efficiency is expensive." The next evening, Carol made tea using the new kettle. The sound of it buzzing filled the room, flat and mechanical. She poured a cup for herself, then said with a grin, "See so much faster. You can't live in the past forever, Patricia." I smiled politely. "You're right," I said. "But the past tends to remember who respected it." She blinked, not understanding. That was fine. My words weren't for her anyway. Over time, I started to move differently through the house. I'd pause at the thresholds, noticing which things no longer belonged to me. I memorized the way the furniture sat, the way the light hit the walls at noon. I learned to walk quietly to make space where there was none. I kept my notebook close. Each night, I logged every change like an accountant, balancing invisible debt. Tablecloth replaced $12. Chair moved to garage. Sentiment lost value retained. New kettle speed. 1 minute warmth, none. Each line steadied me. Each word gave structure to something they were trying to erase. The house no longer echoed with Edward's laughter, but sometimes I thought I could still feel his presence in the smallest things, the smooth edge of the dining table he'd built, the faint creak of the porch step he always meant to fix. It was those details I wrote down too. They were proof that my life had not vanished, only been buried under someone else's convenience. One night, I found Carol asleep in the living room television, flickering across her face. The children's toys were scattered everywhere. I picked up each one, setting them aside carefully. When I reached the mantel, I saw my teapot again. Melissa had moved it there, maybe to make peace. It sat beside the family photo, the old and the new together. For the first time in weeks, I smiled for real. I whispered into the dim room, I still remember every receipt. Then I turned off the television, the kettle light, and left only one lamp burning, the one by the window. It wasn't brightness I needed. It was reminder. Because when people forget your worth, you don't raise your voice. You raise your record. There's a difference between a home and a house full of people. It took only 3 weeks for mine to become the latter. The laughter of children that once sounded innocent and bright now rose and fell like waves of chaos. Every hour carried noise doors, slamming cartoons, blaring arguments, flaring and fading like quick fires. The sound found me even when I didn't seek it, through walls, through vents, through the thin fabric of my patience. I used to wake to birdsong outside the window. Now I woke to Ben shouting. He took my iPad, followed by Melissa's muffled, "Use your inside voice," and Carol's constant sighs about back pain bills or both. The house that once exhaled peace now inhaled clutter and noise until it could hardly breathe. One morning, Ethan knocked on my door, if it could be called knocking. It was more like a hurried tap before pushing it open. "Mom," he said, "we've been thinking. The kids' playroom is getting cramped, and Mom Carol's back really can't handle the stairs. Melissa and I wondered if you'd be more comfortable moving into the laundry room. It's quiet, private, and closer to everything you might need." "Closer to the washing machine, you mean?" I said softly. He smiled, mistaking sarcasm for consent. "Exactly, it'll give you more privacy. We'll even set up a little shelf for your things." I looked at him. My son, the boy who once used to bring me dandelions from the yard, now offering me a corner by the detergent bottles. "I see," I said. "Privacy. That's thoughtful." By that evening, my bed had been moved again. The laundry room was barely large enough for the narrow cot they brought down. There was a single window, small, rectangular, clouded by lint. The air smelled faintly of detergent and damp fabric. Carol peeked in, once holding her cup of tea. "This will be cozy for you," she said. "Besides, it's safer down here if you ever fall." Her words hung in the air, half concern, half dismissal. I smiled because silence was easier than explaining what it felt like to be quietly displaced in your own home. Nights became colder. The hum of the washing machine was constant company. When it wasn't running, there was the dripping from the old copper pipe, slow, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something tired. My head started to ache more often. At first I thought it was the humidity. Then I realized it was the noise, the constant motion, the absence of stillness. When I tried to read, the letters swam. When I stood too quickly, the room seemed to tilt. I told myself it was nothing. I had been through worse. Days blurred. The house moved on without me. They'd all gather in the living room after dinner, the sound of a sitcom echoing through the halls, while I folded laundry that wasn't mine. The scent of fabric softener clung to my hands so strong it masked the smell of chamomile tea. Sometimes Lily, the oldest child, would stop by. "Grandma." "Why don't you come sit with us?" she'd ask. I'd smile. "I like it here. It's quiet." But it wasn't true. The quiet I knew had rhythm, the hum of the fridge, the whisper of trees outside the window, Edward's breath in sleep. This new quiet was suffocating, mechanical, temporary, borrowed. Then came the night of the burst pipe. It was past midnight when I woke to a sound I couldn't place. Not footsteps, not laughter, but something harsher, angrier. I swung my legs off the bed and cold water touched my feet. It was flooding fast, a stream from the copper pipe by the corner, spraying against the wall and pooling across the floor. The water was freezing, soaking through my slippers. I stood still for a second, listening. Upstairs, laughter from the TV. Someone had fallen asleep with it on again. The house was full, yet I was alone. I turned off the power strip, grabbed a wrench from the utility shelf, and crouched beside the pipe. My hands shook from the cold, or from something older, deeper. When I twisted the valve, the stream sputtered, then slowed to a drip. The water stilled. I sat on the wet floor knees, aching breath, visible in the chill. The silence after the noise was louder than any argument. I whispered to no one. Even the house is tired of being disrespected. I spent the rest of the night mopping what I could, wringing towels into the sink, working until my back stiffened. By dawn, the floor was damp but clean. When Ethan came down in the morning, he frowned. "What happened here?" "Just an old pipe giving up," I said. "I fixed it. You should have called me." You were asleep, I said simply. He rubbed his neck uneasy. You didn't get hurt, did you? No, I replied. Not tonight. He didn't ask what I meant. He never did. The next few days, I noticed things differently. The house creaked louder when people walked on the stairs, as if the wood protested every careless step. The lights flickered sometimes when the dryer ran. To them, these were small inconveniences, signs of age, nothing more. To me, they were signals. The house was speaking. And like me, it was tired. Tired of being used, taken for granted, filled with voices that never listened. I started to believe the house, and I shared a quiet understanding. Every night I touched the walls before turning off the light, an old habit like saying goodnight to an old friend who could no longer answer. My fatigue worsened. I moved slower, breathed shallower. Sometimes my hands trembled when I tried to write. Still, I recorded everything. Pipe burst fixed at 2:17 a.m. Water damage minimal. Dignity damage ongoing. I underlined the last sentence twice. One afternoon, as the children screamed over a video game, I sat by the window, if it could still be called that, and stared at the sliver of gray light cutting through the lint. It wasn't sunlight, not really. Just a reminder that light still existed somewhere beyond the noise and damp. Carol's voice carried down the stairs. Patricia, the washing's done, I know, I said quietly. I reached for the wrench again, not to fix anything this time, just to feel its weight. It reminded me of something Edward used to say when he repaired things around the house. It's not about the leak, Pat. It's about who you call to fix it and who you stop calling. That night, I slept lightly, one hand resting on the notebook by my bed. The house slept too, groaning now and then, like an old friend trying to stay patient. And though the floor was dry, I could still feel the memory of that cold water creeping in, reminding me of a truth too simple to ignore. When people forget gratitude, even the walls start to break. It began on a Sunday, the kind of day that used to mean roasted chicken, soft jazz on the radio, and quiet conversation over tea. Now it meant chaos. The smell of fried food clung to the air. Children shouted over one another from the living room. The dishwasher hummed. The TV blared. The world seemed determined to prove there was no such thing as silence anymore. I was sitting at the corner of the kitchen table balancing my checkbook, an old habit I never quite let go of. That's when Melissa's voice cut through the noise. Everyone, can we have a quick family meeting? She stood there, one hand on her hip, the other clutching her phone like a microphone. Ethan looked up from his coffee, uncertain, while Carol appeared behind her, carrying that familiar expression of importance, the kind reserved for people who think they're doing something noble when they're really staging a takeover. Melissa smiled, but there was tension behind it. We need to talk about expenses, she said. Bills have gone up, groceries, electricity, water. With all of us living here, it's only fair that everyone contributes. Her eyes flicked toward me. I said nothing, simply folded my ledger closed. Carol sighed dramatically. I told Melissa this would happen. A house this size needs real structure. Someone has to take charge. Melissa nodded like a judge about to announce a verdict. Mom, please. Let's stay calm. She turned to me again. Patricia, we've noticed you haven't been covering many of the new household costs. With the extra usage and all, maybe it's time we start splitting things evenly. The words hung in the air, polite, polished, sharp. They might as well have said, you're not pulling your weight in your own home. I looked at Ethan, my son. He avoided my eyes, stirring his coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the mug, the sound of guilt disguised as distraction. I see, I said finally. You think I'm not contributing? No one's blaming you, Melissa said quickly. It's just that things are different now. We're one family. Shared costs, shared space. That's fair, right? Carol nodded vigorously. Of course. It's what families do. Families. The word tasted wrong coming from her mouth. I stood up slowly and went to the cabinet near the stairs, the one everyone ignored because it looked too plain to hold anything of value. From inside, I pulled out a small tan folder, worn around the edges labeled Household. Melissa raised an eyebrow. "What's that, receipts?" I said. I laid them on the table one by one, neat, deliberate stacks like cards in a quiet game. Only I knew how to play. Property tax payments, utility bills, roof repair, groceries, insurance, pest control, lawn service, water heater maintenance. Each slip of paper carried a story of years when this house still had laughter without resentment, when paying bills wasn't a negotiation of respect. This, I said, is what I contribute. The room went still, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Melissa's face tightened. "That's not what we meant. We were talking about recent months." I smiled slightly. "I see. You mean since you moved in uninvited." Carol frowned. "That's not fair, Patricia. Melissa and Ethan are just trying to keep things balanced." I met her eyes. Balanced would have meant asking before rearranging my life. Ethan set down his mug. "Mom, let's not make this a big deal." "It's already a big deal," I said softly. "You just didn't notice." Melissa tried again, gentler this time. "We're not trying to disrespect you. It's just times are tight. Everyone's got to chip in." I looked at her perfectly polished nails, the diamond ring that caught the light when she gestured toward the bills. I looked at Carol's gold bracelet, the one she never took off, even when she complained about the cost of detergent. Then I looked at my hands, old-lined, calloused from years of writing checks that built the life they were now living. "I've chipped in," I said, "for 40 years, with money, with work, with silence." Melissa glanced at Ethan for help, but he stared down, pretending to read a grocery list that didn't exist. I gathered the receipts back into the folder, sliding them in carefully. Then I looked at my son and said, "Ethan, how much was your down payment for this house?" He blinked. "You know that, Mom. You helped me." "Yes," I said. "And who paid the property taxes for the last 6 years when you were between jobs?" He hesitated. "You did. And who kept this roof from collapsing, this kitchen from flooding this house, from losing heat every winter?" He didn't answer. I didn't need him to. "These papers," I said, quietly tapping the folder, "are proof that respect should have been the first thing you offered before advice." I turned to leave. Behind me, Ethan muttered, "Mom, it's not about money." I stopped in the doorway, my hand resting on the frame. "No," I said, my voice steady as a drawn line. "Then maybe it's about manners." For a moment, no one spoke. Even the children upstairs went silent, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I could feel every eye on me. Melissa's sharp with embarrassment, Carol's narrowed in judgment, Ethan's filled with something softer but too late. I didn't shout. I didn't slam a door. I simply walked back to the laundry room, my so-called private space, and placed the folder on the nightstand beside my notebook. That night, I wrote under the flickering light bulb Sunday. They held a meeting about fairness. I presented evidence about memory. Then in smaller handwriting below it, manners are the currency of love. Hours bounced. Sleep came late. The hum of the washing machine filled the room again, steady, predictable, unlike the people upstairs. For the first time, I realized I wasn't angry. Not really. I was simply done. Done explaining my worth. Done pretending silence meant peace. Done being grateful for crumbs of courtesy from those who had eaten their fill at my table. As I turned off the light, I heard a soft creak from the ceiling, the same sound the house made when the wind pushed against it. I smiled faintly. Maybe the house was agreeing with me. Maybe it too had reached the point where one more insult, one more weight added, would make something finally break. And when it did, I knew it wouldn't be loud. It would be quiet, measured, paper thin yet undeniable, the way truth always is. It was almost midnight when the house finally fell silent, the kind of silence that isn't peace, just exhaustion. Upstairs, I could still hear faint creaks from Ethan's footsteps, the hum of the refrigerator, the rhythmic ticking of the hallway clock. But beneath all of it, there was a deeper quiet, the kind that settles after disappointment is spoken enough for the day. I sat on my bed, the small cot pressed against the wall of the laundry room, the smell of detergent sharp in the air. My hands rested on the folder of receipts, the one I'd brought to the so-called family meeting. I had thought that might be enough proof of all I'd given, all I'd carried. But numbers, I realized, don't change hearts. What changes people is consequence. And consequence, I thought, was a kind of paperwork, too, just written in silence. That night, I decided to go looking for something I hadn't touched in years. In the corner of the hall closet, behind old winter coats and boxes of Edward's tools, was a small gray safe. The key still hung on the hook by the door, the same hook where he used to keep his work hat. I turned the key, and the lock gave way with a soft click. Inside were old folders, sealed envelopes, and a faint scent of cedar and dust. My fingers brushed over birth certificates, insurance forms, our marriage license. Then I saw it, the thin manila envelope with Edward's handwriting across the front house, deed and notes. I pulled it out carefully and sat on the floor, the light from the hallway spilling across the pages. The first document was the property deed. It listed my name, Patricia Ann Mercer. Only mine. Edward had transferred it to me after he was diagnosed, insisting it would make things simpler. I remembered resisting telling him it wasn't necessary. He had smiled, his voice weak but certain. It's not about fairness, Pat. It's about security. Houses don't argue, people do. Seeing his signature there, faded but steady, felt like hearing his voice again. I whispered to the empty room. You always were a step ahead of me. Underneath the deed was a folded note, one I didn't remember reading before. The paper had yellowed, but Edward's handwriting was unmistakable. It read, "If they ever forget, let the paperwork speak. Houses remember their owners even when people don't." I sat there for a long time, the words blurring in the dim light. That was Edward, plain-spoken, practical, but with a kind of quiet poetry I'd only learned to appreciate after he was gone. He believed in order, in truth, in putting things in writing so they couldn't be twisted later. He must have known a day like this would come, not exactly how, but close enough. I folded the note back carefully and placed it beside the deed. Then I reached for my notebook and wrote a single line beneath the date. He warned me once, when gratitude fades, paper becomes proof. The thought stayed with me all night. I barely slept. By morning, my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been for months. While everyone else was rushing to get ready, Melissa packing lunches, Carol fussing about coffee, Ethan checking emails, I dressed quietly, grabbed my handbag and slipped out through the side door. The November air bit at my cheeks, cold and honest. I walked to the bus stop like someone with nowhere to go, though I knew exactly where I was headed. The law office was small, tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner downtown. A brass plaque by the door read, E.H. Klein, Attorney at Law. Mr. Klein had been our lawyer since Edward's days at the shipping company. He was older now, his hair white, his glasses thick, but his voice still carried the same calm precision. "Patricia," he said when I entered, "it's been a long time. Sit, please." I took a seat, clutching the envelope. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. "I need some advice," I said quietly. "Of course," he replied. "What about I place the deed on his desk? About protecting what's mine?" He studied the paper, nodding slowly. "I see. It's fully under your name, that's good. Are you concerned about family complications?" I met his eyes. "Let's call them misunderstandings." He smiled faintly, understanding more than I'd said. "You're not the first parent to ask that question. There are options, wills, trusts, power of attorney transfers. But you don't strike me as someone looking to argue in court." "I'm not," I said. "I just want to make sure no one can take what's mine while calling it help." He nodded again. "Then what you need isn't a fight. It's protection." "Have you heard of the Senior Housing Trust?" I shook my head. "It's a secure asset trust," he explained, "designed for seniors who want independence without interference. You transfer property ownership to the trust, but remain the lifetime beneficiary. You keep full rights. No one can sell mortgage or claim it without your consent. When you pass, it goes to whoever you designate." I listened to every word settling into me like a puzzle piece, falling into place. "So I'd still live there," I said, "but they wouldn't own it. Not legally. Exactly, he said. It's like putting your home inside a locked box, one only you have the key to. For the first time in months, I exhaled without tension. That sounds right. He adjusted his glasses. It's a private process. We'd need to prepare documentation, notarize it, and file it with the county. Quiet, clean, final. Would you like to proceed? I looked down at the deed, then at Edward's note, his handwriting looping across the page like a signature from the past. Yes, I said. Let's make it official, quietly. When I left the office, the sun was already low. The bakery next door smelled of sugar and cinnamon. I bought a small roll, Edward's favorite, and walked back to the bus stop, the envelope tucked safely inside my coat. The cold wind brushed against my face, but I felt strangely warm. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting, I was acting. That evening, Melissa asked where I'd gone all day. Just out for errands, I said, hanging up my coat. She nodded, distracted, scrolling through her phone. Good. We'll need you to pitch in for the grocery run this week. Prices keep going up. I smiled. Don't worry. I've already started taking care of things. She didn't ask what I meant, and I didn't offer to explain. That night, before bed, I pulled the deed and Edward's note from my purse and placed them under my pillow. It felt symbolic, not for safety, but for closeness. Then I whispered into the still air. Don't worry, love. The paperwork's finally speaking. And somewhere deep in the quiet bones of the house, I thought I heard it answer. They thought I had gone quiet. And they were right, but not for the reasons they believed. Silence, I learned, isn't surrender. It's storage. Every word I didn't speak was a fact waiting to be written down. The days that followed my visit to Mr. Klein's office passed in a kind of deliberate rhythm. Each morning after the house emptied, Melissa taking the kids to school, Ethan off to work, Carol heading to her book club that was mostly gossip and pastries I worked, not with noise but with precision. I opened my notebook and began building what I would later call the record. I took photos of the cracked walls, the broken tiles, the stains on the ceiling where the upstairs bathroom leaked. I saved receipts, plumber, roofer, electrician. I wrote down dates, times costs. Every transaction, every cent had a story. I made copies of the insurance policy, the tax statements, the original mortgage payoff. I labeled each folder carefully: repairs, maintenance, utilities, property. The act of organizing brought a calmness I hadn't felt in years. There's power in evidence, and evidence, unlike people, doesn't lie when the time comes to speak. One afternoon, while Melissa was rearranging the kitchen for the 5th time, I stood quietly near the doorway watching. She was humming, moving plates from one shelf to another, completely unaware that every action of hers was another line in my silent accounting. Carol sat nearby, sipping tea, saying, "You know, once this place is fully updated, it'll feel like yours." Melissa smiled. That's the plan. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were careless. I walked away before they noticed me, went straight to my notebook and wrote, "They call it an update. I call it an invasion. Time will decide which term holds up in court." 2 weeks later, I met with Mr. Klein again. His office smelled of leather and old books, the kind of smell that carries both comfort and consequence. He greeted me with that steady tone of his. "Patricia, I've drafted the trust paperwork. Once it's filed, ownership will transfer to the Senior Housing Trust. You'll remain the sole beneficiary for life. No one can alter it without your signature." I nodded. That's what I want. Quiet, secure. He slid the papers across the desk. "Take your time reading them. There's no rush." But I had already read them before he even said it, every clause, every word of protection that wrapped around my name like a legal shield. "File it," I said simply. He looked at me over his glasses. "Does your family know they will?" I said, "when it matters." He didn't press. Good lawyers never ask for stories they don't need. That night I made tea in my old porcelain pot, the one Melissa once tried to throw away. The sound of boiling water was steady, patient. I watched the steam rise and thought of Edward's note. If they ever forget, let the paperwork speak. I smiled faintly. "It's speaking now, love," I whispered. The following weeks, I doubled down on documentation. Every bill I paid water gas insurance I photographed and filed. Every repair done to the house I asked for a signed invoice. The plumber chuckled once. "You're the most organized client I've had." I smiled. Habit of a lifetime. Some people collect souvenirs. I collect proof. Then came the night of the dinner party. It was Melissa's idea, of course, her networking evening. She invited her friends, her boss, and a few of Ethan's co-workers. Carol helped set the table, beaming like a hostess in a magazine. I hadn't been asked if it was all right. They just assumed. By 6, cars filled the driveway. By 7, the house smelled of wine perfume and arrogance. I stayed in the laundry room at first, but the noise made its way through the vents, laughter that didn't belong here, jokes that echoed off walls Edward and I had painted ourselves. At one point, I heard Melissa say, "We've really made this place our own." Her words rolled through the floorboards like nails. When the clock hit 8, I walked upstairs. I wasn't going to confront anyone, I just needed air. The dining room glowed under warm light. Glasses clinked, forks tapped, music played low. I noticed immediately one of her guests, a man with a wine glass too full, gestured wildly, spilling red wine across my Persian rug. "Oh no." Melissa gasped, laughing it off. "Don't worry, it's old." It wasn't old. It was from Edward's study, one of the last things he ever bought for the house. Everyone kept talking. No one apologized. I stood there for a moment, just long enough for Melissa to notice me. Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, Patricia, you're up. Don't worry, we'll clean it later." I nodded. "Of course." And I walked back downstairs without another word. The next morning, the stain was still there. Wine dark as dried blood soaked into the threads. I made myself coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my folder labeled Household Damages. Then I did what I always did. I documented a photo, a printed estimate from the cleaning company, a receipt for the rug's original cost from the old store in Portland. I filed them neatly, then typed a new line in my notes. March 18th, wine spill, $210 cleaning fee. Damage permanent, courtesy temporary. Ethan came downstairs as I was stapling the documents together. "Morning, Mom," he said, voice casual. "Hope the noise didn't bother you last night." "Not at all," I replied, smiling faintly. "I'm used to it." He hesitated, sensing something under the calm, but not knowing what. "You know, Melissa's just trying to make the place feel alive again." "It is alive," I said softly. "You just stopped noticing who kept it breathing." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I closed the folder. "It means I'm glad you had fun, Ethan. Every celebration has a cost. I just like to make sure mine are paid." He didn't understand. Not yet. That evening, I sat by the window, the same one Edward and I once watched storms through. The porch light flickered, steadying after a moment, as if the house itself were exhaling. I wrote in my journal, they thought silence meant surrender. It was just calculation. Then I underlined the next line twice. Respect is a debt too, and this time it will be collected in writing. As I closed the notebook, the light outside held steady, golden, unshaken, patient. And for the first time, I felt that patience was no longer passive. It was power, waiting to be claimed. It arrived on a Thursday morning, discreet, official, and quiet, just like I had asked. The envelope was plain stamped from the county records office, the kind of letter that rarely draws attention until it does. Melissa was the first to find it. She'd been sorting through the mail on the kitchen counter, humming a tune from one of those morning shows she watched while drinking her oat milk latte. Her humming stopped. Then came her voice, sharp, high-pitched. "What? What is this?" I was in the garden trimming the roses. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. The thud of indignation carried through the floorboards. She burst into the kitchen doorway, waving the envelope. "This says the house is under something called the Silver Oak Senior Trust. It lists you as a lifetime beneficiary and says rent payments will now go through your lawyer." "What does that even mean, Joanna?" I set the pruning shears down, brushed the dirt off my gloves, and looked up calmly. "It means I said that respect also has rent." Her face went red, then pale. You can't be serious. You can't just change ownership without telling us. I tilted my head slightly. Can't I? I thought it was my name on the deed. A silence heavier than argument filled the kitchen. The children had stopped eating breakfast, their spoons frozen mid-air. Even Carol, who was usually never at a loss for words, stood still by the sink, her face tightening, like over-boiled milk. Ethan came down the stairs still in his work clothes, holding his phone. "What's going on?" Melissa turned to him, her voice shaking. "Your mother, she put the house in some kind of trust. She's making us tenants." "Tenants? Do you understand what that means?" He blinked, confused, then looked at me. "Mom, please tell me this is a misunderstanding." I looked straight at him. "No misunderstanding, Ethan. It's protection. The house now belongs to the Silver Oak Senior Trust. I'm its lifetime beneficiary. That means I live here as long as I wish. You and your family may stay if you choose, but through rental terms managed by Mr. Klein's office." He stared at me like I had just spoken in another language. "Rental terms, yes," I said softly. "Rent maintenance contributions all documented. It's simpler this way." Melissa slammed the letter onto the table. "Simpler for you, maybe. Do you realize how humiliating this is? You've turned us into renters in our own home." "Our," I repeated gently. "When did it become our home?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ethan rubbed his temples, pacing. "Mom, I get that you're upset, but this is extreme. You could have just talked to us." "I tried," I said evenly. "Many times. I spoke with actions. You answered with noise. So I found a quieter language paperwork." He stopped, his tone softening, almost pleading. "We're family. You didn't have to go legal." I looked at him, at my son, who had once built tree houses with Edward's old hammer, who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares, and I felt that familiar ache of motherhood, the one that never really fades. "I didn't go legal," I said. "I went factual." "Paperwork doesn't lie, Ethan. People do." The tension thickened, stretching across the room like invisible thread. Carol, ever the diplomat, tried to recover control. "Joanna, dear, this must be a mistake. Surely you can reverse it. You're not thinking clearly. You're just lonely." I turned to her, my expression calm. "Lonely isn't the same as foolish, Carol. And no, I won't be reversing it. The papers are filed and sealed. The trust now owns the house, and the trust listens only to documentation, not guilt." She huffed, crossing her arms. "Unbelievable." "After all Melissa has done for this home," I interrupted gently. "You mean the redecorating, the rearranging, the part where my belongings disappeared to make room for hers?" Her lips tightened. "You're being petty." I smiled faintly. "No, I'm being precise." Ethan sank into a chair, rubbing his forehead. "So that's it. We just pay rent to stay here now." "That's up to you," I said. "Mr. Klein's office will send the formal documents next week. You'll have the first right to lease. If you choose not to, there's a timeline for moving out." Melissa's eyes widened. "Timeline? Are you evicting us?" I met her gaze. "No, I'm offering terms, something you never offered me." For a moment, no one moved. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than any of them. Ethan's voice finally broke the silence. "Why, Mom? Why do this to your own family?" The words stung, but they were old wounds reopened, not new ones. I took a slow breath, because I spent months watching respect shrink in my own home. I watched gratitude turn into entitlement. I tried silence. I tried patience. None of it worked. So I did what your father taught me. "What's that?" Ethan asked quietly. I looked him in the eye. I let the paperwork speak. Later that afternoon, after they had all scattered Melissa upstairs, muttering to her mother, Ethan pacing outside on the phone, trying to understand the legalities, I sat alone in the kitchen, the same envelope still on the table. I traced the embossed letterhead with my finger, the Silver Oak Senior Trust. It looked elegant, solid, real. I poured myself a cup of tea, the one brewed in Edward's old porcelain pot. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet I hadn't felt since they moved in. For the first time, the air didn't smell of tension. It smelled of jasmine and lemon polish, the scent of my home. That evening, Ethan came to my door. He looked tired, softer. "Mom," he said, "Melissa's angry. Carol's furious. But I understand what you're doing. I just wish you'd told me sooner." "I wish you'd listened sooner," I said gently. He sighed. "So it's done, legally?" "Yes," I nodded. "Irreversible." He nodded slowly. "You know Melissa said you blindsided us, but maybe we blinded ourselves." I looked at him, truly looked, and saw the boy he once was beneath the man he'd become. "It's not too late to learn again," I said softly. "The lesson's in the fine print." That night, I sat by the window, the legal letter folded neatly beside my tea. Outside the porch, light glowed steady against the dusk. I opened my journal and wrote October 14th. The Silver Oak Trust is filed. Silence now carries weight. They called it betrayal. I call it boundaries. Then just below, I added one final line. Justice doesn't shout. It signs. And as I closed the notebook, I felt it, that deep, grounded peace that comes when every paper is in its place, every truth written down and every lesson finally learned. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting to be heard. I had already spoken in ink. The silence after a storm always feels heavier than the noise that came before it. In the weeks following the letter, the house began to change again, but this time not through clutter or arguments, through absence. Carol was the first to leave. She packed her floral blouses, her mismatched teacups, and her opinions all in one long afternoon. She didn't say goodbye, not properly, just muttered something about toxic energy and boundaries, as if the irony hadn't registered. I watched her car disappear down the driveway, her silver scarf fluttering in the wind like a surrender flag that refused to admit it. The air that followed her departure was strangely breathable again. For the first time in months, I heard the house exhale. Melissa, however, did not leave quietly. Every morning, her voice carried through the walls, arguments about unfair rent, about being treated like strangers, about how could your mother do this? She spoke as if fairness meant free and respect meant submission. Ethan, caught between guilt and exhaustion, tried to reason with her. "It's just temporary," he kept saying. "We'll figure it out." But she wanted outrage, not logic. I stayed out of their way. I brewed my tea, tended to my roses, and watched as my peace grew roots again. I had stopped reacting, and without my reactions, their words began to fall flat like stones thrown into an empty field. Then came the call from Mr. Klein's office. "The first month's lease payment is late," he said, voice calm as ever. "Would you like me to send a reminder notice?" "Yes," I said simply. He paused. "And Patricia, you sound rested." "I finally am," I replied. That night, for the first time in a long while, I slept without waking to footsteps, voices, or the hum of resentment. The house was quieter. Maybe not peaceful yet, but close enough to remember what peace felt like. The days that followed were uneventful, and that was the blessing. I spent mornings watering the plants, afternoons reading by the kitchen window. Melissa and Ethan barely spoke to me now. Communication came in fragments, text messages about bills, emails from the lawyer, occasional nods in the hallway. When words must pass through paper, they lose their sharpness. By the third week, the inevitable happened. Ethan knocked on my door one evening, his face drawn and tired. "Mom," he began carefully, "we've decided it might be best to move out. Melissa's not comfortable here anymore." "I understand," I said. He blinked, surprised. "You do?" I smiled faintly. Comfort and accountability rarely live in the same house. He sighed. "The kids will miss you." "I'll miss them too," I said softly. "But homes have seasons, Ethan. Maybe this one just finished its summer." He nodded slowly, and for a moment the boy I raised flickered through the man he'd become, hesitant, sincere, trying to do right. 2 days later, boxes appeared in the hallway. Laughter came only from the children, not from their parents. Melissa moved like a storm that had lost direction, slamming drawers, giving cold instructions, muttering about starting fresh. She wouldn't meet my eyes. When the moving truck arrived, I stayed in my room. There was nothing left to say, until there was. A soft knock on my door. It opened slightly, and 3 small faces peeked in my grandchildren. Lily, the eldest at 9, stepped forward with her usual courage. "Grandma," she said, holding a folded piece of paper, "we drew you something." I took it from her hands. It was a crayon drawing the house with bright yellow windows, a garden of red flowers, and a single light glowing above the front porch. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "It's your light," she said proudly. "Mom says it's always on." I smiled. It is. The younger 2 hugged my legs, chattering about their new house, their new rooms. But Lily lingered, her gaze older than her years. "Grandma," she asked quietly, "why does Mom say we can't call this our house anymore?" I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "Because houses aren't about who stays the longest," I said. "They're about who takes care of them, who remembers what they mean." She frowned, thinking deeply. Then she wrapped her small arms around me, whispering into my shoulder, "I like your house better when it's quiet." I felt my throat tighten. "So do I, sweetheart." After they left, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I stood by the window watching the truck pull away. The late afternoon sun painted long gold lines across the porch, the same porch Edward once called the heart of the house. The front yard looked the same as always, yet everything inside me had shifted. I walked through each room, slowly touching the back of chairs, tracing the edges of picture frames, opening the curtains wider. There was more air now, more light, more of me. In the laundry room, the place that had once been my forced corner, I found a forgotten toy car under the washing machine. I picked it up, wiped it clean, and set it on the windowsill. A reminder not of resentment, but of how far the house and I had come. That night, I cooked dinner for one. A simple meal, roasted vegetables, a small glass of wine the way I used to eat before the noise moved in. I set the table for myself, unfolded a linen napkin, and turned on the small radio. Soft classical music filled the room. The house didn't echo anymore. It breathed with me. I raised my glass toward the quiet and whispered, "To the peace that paperwork bought." Then I added softly, "And to the little girl who still loves this house." Before bed, I stepped outside. The night was crisp, the air cool against my skin. The porch light glowed steady, not bright, not harsh, but patient. In that moment, I realized it had never been just a light. It was a promise that even when noise tried to drown it out, truth would find a way to shine through. I locked the door, turned off the kitchen light, and whispered into the dark. They moved out, and I finally came home. Then for the first time in a year, I slept straight through the night. The walls and I finally at peace. There's a particular sound that only emptying a house can make. The low scrape of boxes on hardwood, the sigh of tape pulled from a roll, the muffled shuffle of people trying not to make eye contact. I had heard it before years ago when Edward and I packed our belongings into this very house. Back then, every sound was a promise of beginnings. Now it was the sound of endings. But this time, the boxes weren't mine. They were Ethan's, Melissa's. Theirs, not mine. And for once, I wasn't the one being moved. It began early on a Saturday morning. The sun hadn't fully lifted the lights, still soft and forgiving. Ethan's car was already backed into the driveway, trunk open, boxes neatly stacked. The children ran in and out of rooms with that restless, bittersweet excitement only kids can manage, torn between the joy of something new and the ache of something they can't name. Melissa moved through the kitchen in silence, methodical, her hair tied tightly back. She avoided my eyes the way some people avoid mirrors. Carol didn't come. She'd already left weeks earlier, nursing her wounded pride somewhere far away from here. It was just the 5 of them now, and me, the quiet observer in her own house, watching a chapter, close not with shouting, but with cardboard and dust. "Grandma, can you help me pack my dinosaurs?" It was little Jonah, the youngest, standing in the doorway of what had once been the guest room. His small hands clutched a plastic T-Rex missing one leg. "Of course," I said, kneeling beside him. Together we placed each toy gently into a box, layering them like fossils of a short-lived era. He looked up suddenly. Are you going to be lonely? I smiled, smoothing his hair. No, sweetheart. The house and I have each other. He frowned, puzzled, then nodded seriously, as if making a pact he didn't fully understand. In the hallway, Lily and her brother Daniel were packing books. I noticed one, Charlotte's Web, its cover bent a page torn near the end. Keep that one, I told her. It's about friendship and goodbyes. She hesitated, then tucked it into her backpack instead of the box. Okay, she whispered. Melissa appeared at the door, then arms crossed. Lily, make sure you pack your clothes, not just books. Lily gave a small nod but glanced at me one last time. There was gratitude in her eyes and confusion, the kind of look that lingers in a child's memory longer than words. Downstairs, Ethan was moving furniture. He grunted under the weight of the sofa, muttering something about getting a truck next time. When he saw me watching from the doorway, he paused. Mom, I wanted to say thank you for letting us stay this long. I nodded. You're welcome. His shoulders dropped a mix of exhaustion and guilt. I didn't realize how much space we were taking up, not just in the house, in you. That's something most people don't realize until it's quiet again, I said softly. He looked around at the half-empty living room, at the shelves stripped bare. You sure you'll be okay? I've been okay before you came, I said with a gentle smile. I'll be okay after. He nodded slowly, as if that truth carried both relief and regret. By noon, the kitchen counters were cleared, the refrigerator humming softly in its emptiness. Melissa stood by the sink, staring at the garden through the window. For a long moment, I thought she might say something, maybe an apology, maybe a farewell. But she didn't. She just reached for the faucet, turned it off though it wasn't running, and walked away. I didn't follow. Forgiveness doesn't always require witnesses. Sometimes it's just a quiet choice made alone, and I had already made mine. Outside, Ethan loaded the final boxes into the car. The kids buckled into the back seat, pressing their hands against the glass to wave goodbye. I knelt by the window. Remember what I told you? Lily nodded. That homes aren't about who stays the longest? I smiled. That's right. But you can always visit this one, Daniel asked. Even if it's not our house anymore. Especially then, I said. It means you'll be visiting, not moving in. They laughed softly, not understanding the full weight of those words, and thank goodness for that. Childhood should stay light as long as it can. When the last box was gone, Ethan turned to me. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure where to begin. Finally, he said quietly, You were right about the light. It always makes this place feel safe. It's not the bulb, I said. It's the memory. He looked down. I'll call you once we're settled. I know you will, I replied. We hugged awkwardly, sincerely, like two people relearning a language they once spoke fluently. Then he got into the car. The sound of the engine starting felt different this time, not like abandonment, more like release. They drove off slowly, the gravel crunching under the tires. The car turned at the end of the road and disappeared behind the elm trees. And then silence. Real, beautiful silence. I stood on the porch for a long time, letting the wind touch my face, the same wind that had carried them away. The porch light was off now, no longer a beacon, but a companion. I stepped back inside. Each room greeted me like an old friend. The living room wide and sunlit again. The kitchen humming softly, the smell of lemon oil returning. The hallway echoing only my footsteps now. I walked slowly, touching the walls as I went. The same walls that had held laughter, arguments, exhaustion, and now peace. In the laundry room, my old bed was still there, though I didn't need it anymore. I ran my fingers over the fabric, remembering the nights I lay awake, listening to the house breathe through its pipes. I whispered, We made it home again. The words settled into the air, into the paint, into the wood like a blessing whispered to the walls that had seen it all. That evening, I opened the windows. The scent of rain drifted in, mingling with the faint sweetness of jasmine from the garden. I brewed tea in Edward's old porcelain pot, poured it into his favorite cup, and carried it to the porch. The street was quiet. The world for once was perfectly still. I took a sip and let the warmth spread through me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding on to the house. The house was holding me. We had made it home again, both of us. Months passed quietly and steadily, like a page turning without sound. The house once filled with chaos voices and the restless rhythm of others had settled into something softer. Peaceful, but not empty. Still, but not stillness born of absence. It was the kind of calm that only comes after you've fought hard to earn it. Every morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, brushing across the counter like a familiar hand. The scent of coffee filled the air stronger now that no one diluted it with almond milk or sweet syrups. The house had been repaired and repainted. The walls no longer bore the dents of slammed doors or the stains of spilled wine. They were smooth, again, pale ivory, glowing in the light, like forgiveness made visible. The front porch had new paint, too soft sage green, and the steps no longer creaked. The carpenter, a kind man named Walter, refused to take full payment. "You remind me of my mother," he said with a smile. "She always said homes are like people, they can heal if you give them time." I liked that. I wrote it down later in my journal. The trust had worked exactly as Mr. Klein said it would. The Silver Oak Senior Trust wasn't just a legal structure. It was a community. Once a month, the members met at a restored farmhouse near the edge of town. We shared tea recipes and stories that were less about bitterness and more about beginnings. Some had done what I'd done, moved their homes into protection to reclaim their peace. Others simply came to listen to learn that it's never too late to take back your voice, even if it's written in ink instead of shouted in anger. That first meeting, I sat beside a woman named Doris, who had given her house to her son for simplicity. She smiled when I told her my story. "I wish I'd met you sooner," she said. "I might have saved myself a lawyer and a heartbreak." We laughed, not the laughter of people denying pain, but the laughter of those who have finally outlived it. Ethan visited every other Sunday. He never came empty-handed anymore. Sometimes it was flowers from the market, sometimes groceries, once a small toolbox, because the back gate hinge squeaks again. He didn't try to fix it right away, though. He asked first, "Do you mind if I take a look at it, Mom?" That simple question, "Do you mind?" was worth more than all the apologies in the world. I'd nod, and we'd work quietly together side by side like we used to. No accusations, no explanations, just shared space and understanding. Melissa didn't come often. I didn't expect her to. But when she did, she was polite, courteous even. Once she handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a teapot, not porcelain, not sentimental, but new and beautiful. She looked at me unsure. I thought maybe we could start fresh. I ran my fingers along the smooth handle and said, "Fresh is good." Then I poured her tea in silence. And we drank it not as enemies, not as friends, but as two women finally learning how to stop fighting gravity. The children came most often, Lily especially. She was taller now, more self-assured, but her smile hadn't changed. She loved helping in the garden. "It's quieter here," she once said. "It feels like the house listens when you talk." I smiled. It does. It remembers everything. She tilted her head. "Even the bad stuff. Especially the bad stuff," I said softly, "because that's how it learns what peace sounds like." One evening, as the sun melted behind the trees, Ethan and I sat on the porch. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and lilacs. The porch light flickered once, then steadied the same light Edward had installed decades ago. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know, I used to think what you did was cruel. And now I asked." He smiled faintly. "Now I think it was brave." I said nothing. I just looked at the light glowing against the dusk, unbothered by shadows. He followed my gaze. Dad would have been proud, wouldn't he? I nodded. He always said a home should have two things: strong walls and an honest heart. I just made sure we still had both. Later that night, after Ethan had gone, I walked through the house one last time before bed. Every step echoed softly, not lonely, but content. In the living room, the clock ticked gently. In the kitchen, the kettle steamed on the stove. In the hallway, the photos hung neatly again. Edward's smile, Ethan's childhood, Lily's crayon drawing of the house with the golden light. Everything was in its place. I sat down at the table, opened my journal, and wrote the final entry of the year. The house stands as it always has, quiet, patient, alive. It forgives without asking, and in that, it teaches me daily. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's leaving the light on, even for those who once closed your door. I paused, let the ink dry, then added a final line beneath it, and sometimes they find their way back. The clock struck 9. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamps, and walked to the porch. Outside, the night was gentle crickets, humming wind moving softly through the trees. The porch light glowed steady, warm, unshaken. I stood there for a moment, letting the glow touch my face. It wasn't just light anymore. It was memory, mercy, and love, the quiet kind that doesn't ask to be noticed, only to be left burning. As the camera would fade, if this were a story on screen, the light would remain bright against the dark, defying it without struggle. And my voice calm, certain would carry through the quiet forgiveness isn't weakness. It's leaving the light on, even for those who once closed your door. Then the frame would linger on the porch, on the soft green steps on the door that was finally closed, but never locked. Because peace, I've learned, doesn't need to be guarded. It simply needs to be kept. When respect fades, silence becomes your teacher. And when forgiveness comes, it doesn't shout. It simply leaves the light on. If this story touched you, take a moment before you scroll away. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I read every single comment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about family healing and quiet justice. Because sometimes, peace isn't found in leaving, it's found in coming home.